more people.
Yeah, we got out late. That's why I got out.
Did you get it?
You're on.
All right. Well, hello and welcome to Channel 27 News. Today we have coverage of the sensational story of Frankenstein, which we've captured on video here for you today. Now, this is a video of our previous coverage of the story.
It's at the top left.
Channel 27 News is now experiencing technical difficulties.
All right, back.
Hi, and welcome to Channel 27 News. If you missed our extensive coverage on Dr. Frankenstein's bully, no worries. We have a rerun show just for you. And afterwards, we'll have breaking news.
Welcome to all of our lovely viewers from Channel 27 News. Today we have continuing coverage on the extensive breaking news story of the century that has been dubbed Dr. Frankenstein's Folly. Here's Emily with the background to this unbelievable news.
Thank you, Nicole. Well, viewers, to be honest, I'm not sure where to start other than the very beginning. A beginning that starts with a young man named Victor Frankenstein. This now infamous man was once relatively unknown in our country. He grew up in a typical family, but Victor had a wonderful thirst for knowledge. Upon reaching early adulthood, he moved away from his home to study at a university. While there, he became infatuated with human science. Dangerously infatuated, say some closest to him. According to an anonymous fellow student at the university, Victor was horribly fascinated by the most gruesome topics. He seemed to be hungry for knowledge like no other student. Let's let Maylin give you the details from this point on. After becoming engrossed in his studies, Victor attempted the ultimate experiment, creating another human being. And I'm sure you all know the story from there, right? Well, maybe not. It seems that this news tale twisted deeper than any of you expected. Tell them all about it.
If you're sure, Maylin, let's hope I can stomach this surprising tale. Once Victor created his monster, he became frightened of what he had done. We have sources that say they inhabited the very same neighborhood as Victor and never once suspected him of any wrongdoing. So it looks like he did a good job of hushing it up, until he fled back home, letting the monster roam free and wild, that is. Once Victor arrived home, he learned that his youngest brother had been murdered. He at once seemed to realize that the monster had done this horrible deed. If any of our viewers are interested in an in-depth coverage of the young boy's death, please visit the story on the web at www.channel27news.com/William_Obin. Frankenstein was further horrified to find that a great family friend of his was accused of the murder, and she was convicted and killed for her purported crime. If you missed our coverage of this trial, please refer back to our website at www.channel27.com/William_trial. I think I need a break from this story. Take it from here, Emily.
Thank you, Nicole. According to an anonymous inside source, Victor spent many nights alone and mournful after these two deaths. The source claims that Victor felt immense amounts of guilt at these deaths, and that is why he chose to vacation in the mountains after the dual incidents. While on his mountain escape, we have exclusive coverage of the fact that the monster himself hunted Victor down and made one plea, that Victor create a female counterpart for himself so that he would not live in eternal loneliness. When Victor refused the beast's request, the monster purportedly grew furious and promised Victor that he would regret his decision. Here is Mei Lin to tell you the next shocking event in this twisted news story.
After fleeing the island on which the monster had visited him, Victor discovered an even more terrifying truth. The monster had murdered his best friend. Overcome by a burden of grief, Victor returned home and married his childhood sweetheart, Elizabeth. To his great sadness, the monster commits one more murder. He takes Elizabeth's life on a wedding night. For this young woman's obituary, please visit www.channel27.com/Elizabeth_obit.
Through all of these tragic events, Victor's elderly father had tried to remain strong, but the loss of Elizabeth seemed to be the final blow. Victor's father died a short time after Elizabeth's own demise. His obituary can be found at www.channel27.com/Frankenstein_obit. Now,
and the plot thickens. Now we, Channel 27, have breaking news on the whereabouts of Victor Frankenstein and the dreadful monster he gave life to. I'm going to shift it over to Emily, our news correspondent, who's on location.
Hello viewers, I'm on location in the Arctic Circle where we have just received news that Victor Frankenstein has died. He was found in the Arctic Circle while attempting to chase down the monster. He was pulled aboard a passing ship and died on board. According to that ship's captain, the monster is also soon to be dead. Here we have a quote from Captain Robert Walton, who claims to have spoken with the monster the night after Victor died aboard Captain Walton's vessel. The beast came aboard and spoke with me of his inner turmoil. He most sincerely professed to be too desolate and full of guilt to continue his life. He vowed that he was on one final mission, to go to the northernmost point of this world and end his life there.
thank you, Emily. And from this report, we can only hope that this hideous beast has followed through with his plans. Our deepest sympathies extend to each and every person this horrible news story has inflicted pain upon. Continue to watch Channel 27 News for live coverage as we hop aboard an airplane and scour the Arctic coast for news of this beast.
That is all for now. This has been Channel 27 News, wishing you a
I have learned that it is better to own up to a mistake and face the consequences than to lose everyone and everything you have, including yourself, to the guilt inside.
Do you guys want to get the lines? Okay, so that last part is what we would consider the theme of like what Frankenstein learned through this horrible, all of these crimes that happened after he created the monster. So the theme, if you guys didn't catch it, was that it is better to own up to a mistake and face the consequences than to lose everyone and everything you have, including yourself, to the guilt inside you. So we'll do a quick recap of the plot in case you guys missed it.
And as you guys have heard from the video, a lot of people died, as in pretty much everyone.
Yes. Victor was a normal young man, and he went off to college. And while there, I mean, we're in his laboratory setting right now, and you can see he was obsessed with science and, like, nature. And when he went off to college, he decided to create a human being, and that was his ultimate experiment. But when he did, it resulted in the death of his younger brother, a family friend, his best friend, his wife, and his father, and eventually himself. So, okay.
Yes, well, the mother, in the beginning, she died when, well, Elizabeth, his childhood sweetheart, got yellow fever just before he decided to go study in Ingolstadt. And the mother nursed her back to health, but contracted the fever herself. And it was kind of like a sacrifice for the mother, and she died of yellow fever in an attempt to save Elizabeth. And then when he was in Ingolstadt, he created the monster, and he was terrified of it. And he was visited by his best friend Clovel, who notified him regarding what was happening back home. And it had turned out that his little brother, William, was murdered, and Justine, who was kind of like a maid for their house, was accused of the murder of William. And when he traveled back to Geneva, which his hometown, he discovered that the monster was the true murderer. But he felt that exposing the secret of the monster would frighten everyone, and therefore he kept it a secret, which resulted in the death of Justine as well as William. And then eventually, he, in an attempt to escape his own sense of guilt, he travels to the mountains, and there he encounters this monster. And the monster tells him the story of him, basically, from the moment that he was created to him murdering William and eventually causing the death of Justine and his whole experience. He asks Victor to create a mate for him. And at first Victor does create the mate, but eventually he realizes that it would be a horrific deed. And so he destroys the second monster, which really angered the monster because the monster was very lonely and he really desired a companion. And then, as an act of revenge, the monster kills his best friend Clovel. And then, on the wedding night of Frankenstein and Elizabeth, the monster murders Elizabeth, and eventually the father dies as well. So basically, Victor started out in this loving family, surrounded by friends and love and stuff. And because of the monster, everyone that he's ever loved or cared about dies. And eventually, he dies as well as the monster.
All right, and to investigate some of those characters, we'll go into their character acrostics. Okay, so the character of Victor, he's a pretty deep character. He's very well developed, but we found that he was very investigative. He learned a lot in his time on Earth, and he was introspective. He didn't like to place a lot of his trust in other people, and he mostly stayed to himself, not making many close friends throughout his life. He was curious. I mean, no one else has ever tried to create a human being, so we're still confused as to why he was driven to do that, but it must have just been his love of learning and nature enthusiast. As you can see, we have a poster in the back that was once his. He was a fanatic about nature and the creation of life. And he had a thirst for knowledge because he was a scholar at the very root of things. I mean, he was a brother and a son, but at the heart of his life, he was a scholar.
Elizabeth, she was the childhood sweetheart and eventually Frankenstein's wife. She was a very sensitive person, but there weren't much on her because she was kind of like a passive character. She was loving. She was turbid. She was prized. She was the fiancée of Victor. She was beautiful. She was worrisome. And in the story, there was one time where she wrote a letter to Victor, and it expressed her concern for him. And she was devoted from from when they were a child. She had stayed by Victor's side throughout the whole novel, and she brightens the room.
Okay, Henry Clerval was Victor's best friend, especially through college in Ingolstadt. And he was a very happy, open-minded person. He encouraged Victor and went about his own ways as well. He was also concerned because when he went to find Victor and give him the letter about William, Victor's brother,
He found him, and Victor was sick, and he was terrified because of this monster that he let loose. He supported Victor and convinced him to travel back to Geneva. And he's a wayfarer. He liked to travel all over the countries in Europe.
Okay, and this is the last poem about the monster that Victor gave life to. Obviously, he was a murderer. He was very observant. He learned how to speak the language, even though when he was created, he had no knowledge of any type. He was very lonely. As you heard, he wanted Victor to create a counterpart for him like a wife, because there was no one else like him on Earth. He was ominous. He was big and distorted, and no one wanted to deal with him. But he was still hopeful. He thought that perhaps Victor, this guy that gave him life, would be kind enough to give him a counterpart. But when this fell through, he sought revenge, and that is when he killed Elizabeth on their wedding night. And now we have a poem.
Okay. The gloomy landscape gives freedom to a disfigured monster. He is a robber. His touch the dark bruise of death. Leaving survivors forsaken, their terror emerges within their solitude, and all is drowned in guilt. His desolate soul remains unseen, for its fragility is masked by a gruesome hideousness. The pain of solitary life is growing still, until spilling its contents over the monster's soul. Fire and ice collide within the victim's screams invade. Relentless is the monster's pain. This maniacal beast, basking in loneliness, ravages on, until the last piece of his maker's soul dissolves into everlasting sorrow, and is taken from the presence of any other man hereafter. And that music was just setting the mood for that poem in the end. Because this was a very creepy book. It wasn't at all the love story, even though there is one in it.
And it's hard to say who was the protagonist or antagonist because Victor was at fault for creating the monster but then abandoning it. And the monster was kind of at fault for letting his emotions take over and causing the death of so many people.
Okay, and here's the present.
Just click
Next.
with the arrow.
Okay. Yeah. So the structure of the novel. Okay. The structure of the novel, it was actually kind of a story within a story. When this is going to be a little confusing, but when the novel begins, it's actually letters written from a captain, and he's writing to his sister, and he's telling him, this guy, he's on a ship in the Arctic Circle, and he's saying, this man just came aboard, and he's very sick, and he's telling me these crazy stories. So then the captain goes on to write down all of the stories that this man is telling, and this man, of course, is Victor Frankenstein. And he was in the Arctic Circle because he's searching for the monster to gain revenge. And then, so really the entire story about Victor Frankenstein is being told by this captain. And then at the end, it goes back into letters. And that is how we learn that Victor dies, because the captain is still writing to his sister, and he's saying, you know, this man on the ship, he died, and all of these strange tales that he told him.
And the use of letters kind of makes the story more realistic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just do point of view.
Okay, the point of view was first person, and we felt that the author, Mary Shelley, wrote this book in first person no matter who was speaking, so that you could become the character. You as the reader got into the story and developed your own ideas on what was going to happen next from this plot. The point of view does shift from person to person. First it's Robert Walton, Captain Robert Walton, and then it's Victor Frankenstein, and as the story begins. And then it's the monster. And then it shifts back to Victor. And then again, at the end of the book, it shifts back to the captain.
Yeah, since it's in first person, it's kind of like as if you were each of one of the characters, because, you know, Frankenstein's telling this to Watton, so it's kind of like you're Watton. So,
Ready to go into the conflict?
Well, the conflict is kind of like man versus self. With Victor, he struggles to learn all that there is to sciences, and he challenges himself by creating the monster. But then, after the realization that the monster is this hideous creature, he kind of is in fear of what he did, and he kind of tries to protect those around him, but he's really cowardly in his attempt, and that kind of caused the death of so many of those he loved. And man versus supernatural, which would be the monster is a supernatural, and man versus nature, because the monster, even though he's this hideous creature, he was once formed by parts that were collected from some stuff that were once, natural, because Victor used body parts from the grave, and those people that were dead were once alive. And throughout the book, there's all these segments where Shelley mentions how Victor finds comfort in the beauties of nature. So it's kind of like there's a hideous side to everything, including nature.
Okay, some of the figurative language that's used in this book, a heavy one is the simile, and that's kind of used because it's such like an unbelievable tale that a lot of imagery and figurative language is used so you can imagine the story better. So one was, I find compassion arise like a mountain river from unknowable and almost forgotten sources. And here he's so desolate, yet sometimes if he can talk to a friend or Elizabeth before the end of the novel, he really finds comfort in that, even though he's so out there on his own. Another simile was, this is from the monster, I was like a wild beast that has broken the toils, destroying the objects that obstructed me and ranging through the wood with a stag-like swiftness.
Another aspect of figurative language that Mary Shelley uses is a metaphor. And this is a quote, and it says, I, the miserable and the abandoned, am an abortion to be spurned at, and kicked, and trampled on. And that's just saying the monster is so desolate that no one, and ugly, that no one wants to take him in as a friend or even help him at all. He lives in the forest for a little while too.
Yeah, after when he was in the forest, he tries to learn the ways of the human, how to be human. And when he first encountered, he made 3 encounters, and all 3 times the people really kind of ran threw stuff at him. They ran away from him. They were very unaccepting of him. And at the end, he saves a woman that was drowning, but he gets shot for it. So it really shows how unaccepting people were of him.
And then,
And personification and emotion are used throughout the novel to really express the genre of the book, which is because the book has a really romantic tone and style. And an example would be when he entered misery and despair alone welcomed him. And it really showed the mood of the book and how depressing it is, because Frankenstein is truly a tragedy.
okay, and then some of the symbols. One of the symbols, even though he was a character, was the monster. It kind of showed Victor's own self-hate and self-dissatisfaction, because you kind of get the tone through the whole book that even though he's this genius, he's a brilliant person, no one can deny that, but there's a part of him that's never quite satisfied with himself, and when he creates the monster, it's almost like the monster is kind of his dual personality, like that is the part of Victor that he hates about himself. Another symbol is fire.
Fire relates back to Greek mythology. The monster talks about fire a lot, And the way it connects back to Greek mythology is through the modern Prometheus. Prometheus was a god, and he stole fire from the gods and gave it to the humans, like used it to create human life, and then he was punished for it. So in that way, he was shunned from society as well as the monster was shunned from society.
Oh, sorry. I had something to add. Yeah, so it's actually the subtitle of the novel. It's called Frankenstein, A Modern Prometheus, because Mary Shelley is trying to explain that he, much like Prometheus, creates something really great, but uses it and it's terrible and it's bad and he's punished for it ultimately. So fire was kind of a symbol because it was just something that destroys the world, much like Frankenstein's creation was.
And at the end, the monster burns himself.
Yes. And there are sources.
It's up at the top.
All of the elements that we have shown you today, except for the Facebook page, were found in archaeological digs and brought to Channel 27 News.
Right, and this Facebook page, we're assuming it's a fan page created by someone for Mary Shelley, but we have a little bit of information we've dug up about her, and really she had kind of an interesting life before she chronicled this story. So, take a look.
Well, she was the daughter of two really influential but radical writers. Her mother died giving birth to her, and her mother was a strong feminist. And even though her mother died when she was only like 10 days old, her mother's writing really influenced her because her mother grew up with an alcoholic father who abused her mother, and her first love also abandoned her. And in a sense, Victor's mother was kind of portrayed like her mother because both mothers sacrificed their lives for the sake of their children. And her father, William Godwin, was a really radical person. He promoted anarchism, and he was also an atheist, and religion was also somewhat tied in with the novel, and this also was the influence of her husband, Percy Shelley, who she had an affair with. Percy was an atheist as well as her father, and in the book, the monster learns to read, and one of the first books that he reads is Paradise Lost, where he compares himself to Adam as well as Satan, and it's kind of like tying in the idea of Victor being the god, and the female companion of the monster would have been Eve, but instead of creating that, the Victor kind of thought of how if these two fall in love and reproduce, it would kind of generate a new generation of these hideous creatures, and he was fearful of that, and that's also where the dangers of knowledge comes in. So, yeah.
Also, her father was a social theorist, which allowed Mary Shelley to see different aspects between religion and society, and that also plays a part in the hatred that the monster feels from society within the book.
And it's really weird reading and learning about Mary Shelley. You do realize that her life definitely influenced it because all of the people around her kind of seem to play a little bit of a role in all of the themes of Frankenstein.
And the book also includes some allusions such as Paradise Lost and the ruins of the ancient mariner. And during the time period, the scientific process was very kind of imaginative because they believed in this theory called galvanism, which was the theory that muscles could be kind of stimulated by electricity, and that's kind of how the science fiction aspect of the book comes through with the creation of the monster.
but yet it's reality as well, because today we have pacemakers, and those, if your heart stops or has an irregular beat, it shocks you, and your heart's a muscle. So that also relates to now.
And you can access this on Facebook if you want. So you want to, because we didn't go over everything. All right.
All right, well, that is all for today's show. Thank you guys very much. You've been a very nice audience. And this is signing off, Channel 27 News.
Yeah, does anyone have questions? Quickly.
Hit the lights.
Lights. No questions.
Can we see the bottom of the